Hello guys, I'm actually making chips again. My friend Terry said we ought to call this Chips Ahoy. Well, we're certainly back to getting something done in the shop, although it's in rather small increments actually. I tend not to be out here for huge periods of time, but we're getting stuff done slowly. When I left in my last clip of the series here, I left the lathe with the aluminum disc marked up with some markers, and at the moment probably got way too much reflection on here. That might show. So I've got radial markings. Instead of having the holes in lines because of my y-axis limitation, I'm going to go for radial. And the next step here is to enlarge the center hole, but before I do that I've got to make or modify the centering block for the rotary table, which incidentally, if nobody remembers, and this is a heavy son of a whatnot, it is so old, very beaten up. God damn, that's heavy. But previously I've used the 4 T-slots for holding work or put a chuck on top, but that hasn't really been adequate for what I've wanted. So thanks to Lee, Mr. Pragmatic Lee, who made a very nice pallet for his rotary table, I'm doing the same. So as I say, this is where we've got to. But apart from modifying the centering slug, shall we call it, for the rotary table, I've also these 4 points here, which will be for the T-slot mounting. I haven't got any T-nuts. I thought I had got, well, what I've got actually is some rather primitive modified bolts which have worked in the past, but I really need proper T-nuts for this, and that's got to be done. So that plus the centering slug, that's next on the list, and I've already done so much general fiddle and messing about that I thought this is probably worthy of part 1 instead of making it a super length video. So anyway, this is part 1, right, what you've seen so far, and I'll be getting on with this, take it a stage or 2 further as soon as I can, so bear with me. Everything will happen a bit slowly still at the moment, but we're getting there, and other projects are on the back burner, so I've got stuff to do, which is nice. I just need to get the time to do it. Incidentally, one other thing I forgot to mention. I am so out of space for storing stuff. It's got ridiculous. I just haven't got anywhere else to put things. So at some point, despite wanting to get on with projects, I've got to spend some time trying to reorganize. And that's going to be a hell of a job. So even that is going to slow me down from the project point of view, but it has to be done when I can get round to it. So anyway, for the time being, thanks for watching, and part 2 coming when it comes. Alright? Bye for now. Well, as you've seen, the plasma cutter didn't do very good. Just made a hell of a damn mess on this. So we're doing it the hard way, cutting off the corners and trying to get to the stage really where we can bore this out, get it on an expanding mandrel and turn it to a decent circle and probably face it at the same time, hopefully. So we'll just carry on. Very slow job. Actually, it's about as exciting as watching paint dry. Well, we've got a sort of circle, and that's got to be dealt with in the lathe. So what I'm doing here, out of my expanding arbors, I've got this 7/8, and I could actually go one size bigger, but in order to keep critical for the center hole, which I've started drilling, I'm going to drill through it 3/4 and then use a boring bar to take it up to size so that we get a good fit on the arbor. Yeah, I'm getting a bit of belt slip on this old drill press. I must take up the tension a bit, but that's about as big as I want to go. I can't get a lot of torque out of this machine. So anyway, we've got clamped up on here, and I think we're about it's probably barely half a thou, and the drilled hole is not very smooth, so that'll do for positioning, and then we can get the boring bar in it. Well, this import boring bar and the tooling is not actually very good. I think it'll do. I've taken a couple of light cuts. I'm going to take another 20. Tend to have to take a spring cut too after the first pass. Yeah, this is one of those tools that's brazed carbide. It's got too much of a point on it. I should have actually honed it and put a slight radius on. But there's a terrible amount of spring in these things, so I'll have to come back up and take a spring pass. Anyway, it's just a slow, steady job. Well, I switched to a shorter. In fact, you can't see the whole length. Just in the top of the frame, I think. This is a shorter stem. Put a slight radius on it, and getting a better cut from that. The other one was too long, and I was getting spring effect, which wasn't very good at all. So I think I'm actually a fraction of a thou off where I want to be. But I might just take a skim. I don't know whether it'll be a spring pass. I don't want to take much more off. I'd rather make this arbor go in a little bit tight. Once we've done that, we can get over to the lathe. Well, this is going to be a fairly long job, because this is way out of round since my rough cut. I've put an HSS tool in here It's actually a round nose that I used for something else, but I think it'll do quite well for this. So it's going to be a long job. I'll take a cut or two and then we'll come back later. Yeah, that's coming on. Although this machine, in theory, it's 11-inch throw, well, 5.5-inch radius. This is 7.5, and I'm really a bit pushed with the tool post. I've got the compound turned reverse direction. You can't see. It's pointing back to try and get the tool clearance to get at this. So anyway, I'm going to carry on with that and come back later. Well, we're making some progress. We've got quite a long way to go down. I did try the back gear actually because of the effective cutting speed with this diameter, but the HSS tool wasn't an ideal grind, so I've popped in a brazed carbide, which actually is doing quite a nice job, and interrupted cuts are never much fun. We've got past some of the worst banging and knocking, but we've got a little way to go. You might have noticed there that there's a slight spring cut on the return. Now I think this is due to partly the age of the machine, and I've got the cross slide and compound set a bit awkward. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a tiny bit of free play in it. You can't really feel much there, but I think there's a thou difference, so I do get that slight call it a spring cut on the return. I've got about two areas left I've got to get down to, but we're getting there, and I'll just take a quick won't bother to use the calipers yet. Down to nearly 7.5, and 7 3/8 is the target. Right, we're nearly there. I'm going to leave it slightly plus actually. It's not a dimension that has to be super accurate. We faced off, having set this up again with an indicator, so we only had to take a fairly small skim, and we stopped short of the arbor there because that hole's going to be made bigger. So now we've got to turn that round and set up for truth and take a facing cut on the other side. I don't suppose this indicator will show, and there's about 8 thou there, and I can't knock it true, so it's a problem with the arbor, I think. Just can't quite repeat that truth on there, so it's a change of plan. We'll set this up on the mill, and although my X travel is limited, I'm going to use a fly cutter, I think, and get the truth from side to side that way. I think that's all I can do. Well, I've set up on the table here. I'm using all 6 of my low profile clamps, and because of my rather limited Y travel, which isn't enough for this to do totally, I've got a good sized fly cutter here which is giving about a 3 1/4 inch circle, I think, something like that. Well, the tooling has had a rather quick grind, but it seems to be cutting fairly well. I've just made a start, so I'll carry on and give you a flavour. I hope there's not too much reflection on the aluminum with the lighting. It doesn't seem too bad. I could probably have made a better grind on that tooling, but we're getting a cut. Plenty of chips everywhere. So we'll move across. We'll actually have to take another 2 cuts, so I'll probably split it one half and half. I think I need to retrim this, but we should be parallel between the 2 sides. That's the important thing. Not perfect. Although the fly cutters are on R8, it's a bit crude, so I'm not really quite sure how well it's doing, but I mean that I'm going to treat this as the underneath, and the side we faced on the lathe we'll have for the top. And I've got to do some marking up on here, so we're going to go back in the lathe, put a chamfer on that edge, and mark out some circles for holes. I'm going to mark out some circles here. I think the pen's drying up. Well, the plan at the moment is we'll have alternate holes, so we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll move up to 1, 2, 3, and so on. So I think one row, and 2 intermediates, and let's mark it up for 4 points for the T-slots on the rotary table. Right, well, using the dividing gear on the back of the spindle, I've got this marked up. I've got to join these lines, take it off the arbor. So we'll have 4 points for attachment to the table, and then that will be 1, 2, 3, 4 holes. That'll be 3, that'll be 4, and so on. I think that'll work out alright. We'll have to see.